The sun blazes down on 50,000 Romans packed into stone seats that radiate heat like furnace walls. The year is 73 AD and the Colosseum is about to reveal something far darker than gladiatorial combat. In the center of the arena stands a young woman named Lucia, daughter of Senator Marcus Octavius. 3 days ago, she lived in a marble villa with servants attending her every need. Yesterday, her father was executed for treason. Today, she faces something the Romans considered far worse than death: systematic destruction of everything that made her human, performed before the largest audience ever assembled for a single person's suffering. This is not entertainment. This is psychological warfare refined into an art form. And what happens in the next 3 hours will echo through her bloodline for generations. The placard hanging from her neck reads words that make the crowd roar with approval, and in that moment, Lucia understands a truth that turns her blood cold. Rome hasn't brought her here to kill her. They've brought her here to erase her. You were taught that Rome built aqueducts and roads, that they gave us law codes and engineering marvels. You learned about Julius Caesar and Marcus Aurelius, about military conquests and the Pax Romana. But your history teacher never explained what Rome did every single day in hundreds of amphitheaters across an empire of 50 million people. They never told you about the systematic protocols designed not just to punish criminals, but to destroy human beings so completely that their annihilation served as warning to entire populations. They never showed you the legal texts that specified exactly how different classes of people should be broken, the administrative records that tracked condemned individuals like inventory, or the philosophical treatises that debated optimal methods for extracting maximum psychological damage. Tonight, you are going to discover why Roman historians wrote about these spectacles with the same clinical precision they used for describing bridge construction, as if destroying human dignity was simply another engineering problem to be solved efficiently. The scale of what Rome built is almost impossible to comprehend. The Colosseum could hold 50,000 spectators, but it was just one facility in a network of hundreds. Every major city across the empire from Britain to North Africa had amphitheaters, or theaters designed specifically for public spectacles. Smaller towns had open plazas where rituals could be performed for local audiences. The infrastructure required to implement this system empire-wide cost more than many military campaigns. That investment reveals something crucial: this wasn't peripheral to Roman power. This was central to how Rome maintained control over territories spanning 3 continents with relatively limited military forces. Public humiliation wasn't just punishment, it was social engineering implemented through carefully designed psychological warfare. The theoretical framework was sophisticated and openly discussed by Rome's greatest minds. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, wrote extensively about how witnessing the degradation of norm violators reinforced proper behavior in observers. Cicero analyzed how public spectacles created emotional bonds between state and population through shared experience. Roman legal theorists argued that punishment severity should match not just the crime, but the criminal's social status, with public humiliation serving as appropriate penalty for those whose crimes threatened social order. This reveals something that should chill you to your core. The Romans didn't just practice this casually. They thought deeply about it. They analyzed it. They debated methods. They wrote treatises about psychological effects. This was systematic application of principles that modern researchers on psychological torture confirm are devastatingly effective. The Romans discovered these mechanisms 2,000 years before modern psychology formally studied them. The legal framework established precise categories. Roman law distinguished between citizens and non-citizens, between freeborn and freed, between upper and lower classes. The type of public ritual deemed appropriate varied based on these distinctions. A senator faced different protocols than a freedman, who faced different protocols than a slave. The system was calibrated with mathematical precision to enforce hierarchy. What happened to you depended not primarily on what you did, but on who you were and what social message your destruction could send. The economic framework made the system self-sustaining. The state didn't bear all costs. Wealthy individuals sponsored spectacles to gain political favor. Entrepreneurs bid for contracts to provide performers, animals, and condemned individuals. A sophisticated market existed for supplying everything needed. This created financial incentives for expansion rather than reform. If you want to understand how empires really maintain power, how psychological control operates at massive scale, subscribe now, because we are about to go deeper into mechanisms that Rome perfected, and that echo through authoritarian systems even today. Comment below and tell Med if they teach you any of this in school, because the victims whose suffering was recorded in Roman sources deserve to have their experiences acknowledged rather than sanitized into entertaining myths about gladiatorial honor. The administrative infrastructure was vast. Officials called editors organized spectacles with authority to requisition resources and allocate condemned prisoners. Records tracked which individuals were assigned to which events, ensuring efficient use of human resources. Professionals called linistas managed logistics and trained performers. The bureaucracy supporting public humiliation rivaled the bureaucracy supporting the legions. Documentary evidence survived because Romans didn't consider these practices shameful. They documented them proudly in historical chronicles, legal commentaries, philosophical essays, personal letters, and graffiti on amphitheater walls. When historian Tacitus describes these spectacles, his tone is analytical rather than critical. When Pliny the Younger writes letters describing elaborate rituals he witnessed, he treats them as notable events worth recording. When legal texts specify appropriate protocols, the language is precise and clinical. The most disturbing aspect is how the system evolved. Early spectacles were relatively crude and improvised. Over centuries, Rome refined the process through systematic observation. What maximized psychological impact? What created lasting deterrent effects? What kept audiences most engaged? Romans experimented and implemented improvements based on results. The empire learned through experience how to destroy human dignity with maximum efficiency, and that knowledge was preserved, transmitted, and enhanced across generations. Lucia's ordeal began 3 days before she entered the arena. In cells beneath the Colosseum where condemned prisoners awaited their fates. She wasn't harmed physically during those 72 hours, but she was subjected to calculated psychological pressure that modern interrogation experts would immediately recognize. She could hear the crowds roar from above as other spectacles were performed. She could hear animals growling and pacing in nearby cages. She could hear screams from other prisoners. Guards told her repeatedly what awaited her in the arena, with details designed to maximize anticipatory terror. Sleep was disrupted randomly. Food was minimal. The goal was ensuring she entered the arena already psychologically fractured, making the public ritual easier to execute. This wasn't cruelty, this was protocol, refined through decades of observation about how to break human resistance before the performance even began. On the morning of her spectacle, she was bathed and dressed carefully. Every detail was deliberate. The garment was designed to emphasize vulnerability. The placard hung around her neck was heavy enough to force her posture into submission. As she was led through tunnels toward the arena entrance, she had to pass other prisoners who would face their own fates, later her suffering serving as preview of theirs, compounding their terror. The moment she stepped into sunlight and 50,000 faces turned toward her, the transformation from private person to public symbol was complete. Many spectators knew her family, remembered when the Octavius name commanded respect. That contrast between previous status and current state was the essential element that made the spectacle psychologically devastating. The 4 actors who entered the arena were professionals who specialized in these performances. The lead performer, a man named Quintus who appears in other historical records, was skilled at reading both victim and audience, adjusting his choreography to maximize impact. They carried props, a wooden throne, mock regalia, implements designed not to harm but to mock. The crowd understood immediately what performance had been planned. What followed was 3 hours of carefully scripted ritual designed to systematically dismantle every element of Lucia's identity. She was forced to sit on the throne while Quintus proclaimed in a voice trained to carry across the vast space that she represented, traitorous arrogance that needed correction. The crowd's response confirmed his words had landed effectively. The actors forced Lucia through a series of scenarios, each designed to destroy specific aspects of dignity. A mock coronation with a wreath made of refuse inverted the symbols of authority her class valued. Forced recitations made her speak words condemning herself and her family, making her complicit in her own degradation. A grotesque banquet where she had to pretend to consume spoiled food mocked the refined dining that mocked upper-class Roman life. Between these set pieces came more direct humiliations, progressive removal of dignity through actions that destroyed autonomy and identity. The audience wasn't passive. They shouted suggestions. They threw objects. Their participation was crucial because this was just state punishment. This was the entire community participating in enforcement of social norms, demonstrating that collective will supported Rome's absolute authority. Roman sources note that Lucia dissociated partway through the ordeal. She began responding mechanically to commands, performing required actions but showing no emotional reaction. The actors recognized this, which historical accounts suggest was common. When victims dissociated, audience engagement dropped because the spectacle lost emotional resonance. The solution, documented in multiple sources describing similar events, was escalation, increasing intensity until the victim's psychological defenses shattered completely and raw suffering became visible again. Modern trauma experts analyzing these historical descriptions recognize techniques that produce devastating and often permanent psychological damage. The Romans understood this empirically through centuries of observation and refinement. After 3 hours, Lucia was removed from the arena. She wasn't executed, that might have been mercy. She was released to survive with memory of what 50,000 witnesses had seen. This was crucial to the system's effectiveness. A dead martyr could become a symbol of resistance. A broken survivor, visibly destroyed, demonstrated the absolute futility of challenging Roman power. Her continued existence served as a walking reminder to everyone who knew her family, everyone who remembered their status, everyone who might consider similar resistance. The message was clear: Rome could reach anyone, destroy anyone, no matter how protected by wealth or status they thought themselves. And Rome would do it in the most public, most psychologically devastating way possible. The sophistication reveals itself in details that historians analyzing Roman sources with modern psychological understanding now recognize. Effective protocols required careful calibration. Too much violence produced death, ending the spectacle prematurely. Too little produced audience dissatisfaction, defeating the purpose. Optimal execution maximized psychological damage and audience engagement, while maintaining the victim's consciousness throughout. The Romans also understood that effective targeting mattered. Destroying someone with no status accomplished little, but demonstrating that privilege provided no protection accomplished much. The most effective spectacles involved victims whose fall from power was dramatic and visible, whose destruction sent clear messages about the cost of resistance to imperial authority. What happened to Lucia in 73 AD was not unique. Similar spectacles occurred daily across the empire in hundreds of facilities for decades. Thousands of individuals were processed through these protocols, their suffering documented in sources that survived because Romans considered this noteworthy rather than shameful. The system operated at industrial scale, supported by massive infrastructure, sophisticated theory, and administrative efficiency that matched Rome's military organization. Understanding this is essential to understanding how empires actually function, not through the heroic narratives we're taught, but through systematic application of psychological terror that makes resistance seem futile and submission seem inevitable. This is what they never taught you in history class. This is what the romanticized versions and movies carefully omit. This is the machinery of power stripped of comfortable myths. Rome did not conquer and hold 50 million people primarily through military might. They did it through making the psychological cost of resistance so devastating that most people chose submission before they were ever threatened directly. The spectacle served as constant reminder of what awaited those who challenged the system, creating self-policing populations who enforced Roman norms on each other without requiring constant military presence. In the space below, tell us honestly, does knowing this change how you think about Rome, about empire, about how power actually operates? Because these mechanisms didn't die with the Colosseum, they evolved, refined themselves, reappeared in different forms across centuries. Understanding how they worked then helps us recognize how they work now. The victims like Lucia, whose names survived in sources that documented their destruction, deserve to be remembered not as entertaining historical anecdotes, but as human beings who suffered under systems designed with sophistication and cruelty in equal measure. Their story is Rome's real legacy, and it's one we ignore at our peril.